Hi, Lauren Hughes here with Integrity Home Group and Keller Williams Preferred. We're going to talk about debt annihilation. It's a fun one. Anyone that's been tuning in recently, I've been talking a lot about habits and habit creation. It's kind of a theme at the beginning of the year. And I love 1% changes. And the reason why I talk about it, because that is how I've gotten out of debt several times, because apparently I don't learn my lesson the first time. So I'm just telling you a couple things that have worked for me. There are so many different ways to get out of debt, and you have to kind of figure out when the timing's right for you. I know, my favorite day is always today. However, there's COVID going on, there's work stuff. I challenge you to find the day when, and I'm not saying when it is because life happens and it's a little crazier now, lot crazier now. If you watch the news, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole right now, but I just challenge you to find the time or find the day that you want to start with your debt annihilation. And I'm talking about that because I've been talking with a lot of clients about buying homes, and that down payment is always a topic of discussion. That's always my limiting factor with buying a personal residence or with Hughes Capital buying an investment property. It's always about leveraging cash and monitoring, leveraging good, that's good and bad debt. But today we're talking about getting rid of debt, and investor wise, it's getting rid of bad debt. And some of the things that I've done that have worked really well. Just recently in 2020, I was able to annihilate $118,000 worth of bad debt that I got myself into. And I went and I was able to do that. One, because I was stuck on a beautiful island in March and it shut down. And so I was there for a long time and I couldn't actually use my credit cards. So that helped. But what I did, so the debt annihilation was intentional. The being stuck on an island and, COVID, that was not intentional. That I did not see that one coming at all. However, I use that to my advantage because, we're stuck at home. I couldn't physically do any online shopping, which was brilliant, and because I couldn't get anything shipped into the island. So what I was able to do, I went back old school and I started using cash. And so that's the biggest thing. I always keep my cash jar here because that's my savings account for pennies. And if you hear me talk a lot, I talk about rolling pennies and finding those wheat pennies because they're worth twice as much as a real penny. Anyway, so I like to go back to basics whenever I'm trying to reduce my expenditures or I'm trying to reduce my debt. I like to use cash. I stop using my credit cards immediately. And that's because I have using a credit card is easy because you're like, yeah, whatever it costs. But there's something different when you have to get the money out of your wallet and you have to part with it and you see it when you're counting it and you're like 20, 40, 60, crap. There's something different in it and I can't explain it, but it really works for me. And I do double takes when I'm like, do I really need that second? Or do I really need that organic frou-frou tea? I mean, sometimes yeah, sometimes no. And I'm like, how much? It's $8 for that 12-ounce glass? Okay, maybe I don't need it. So I always say I use cash, and it allows you to also monitor your budget because you can't, when you're out of cash, you're out of cash. And you can't just be like, oh, let me pull out another credit card because you're not using them. I love Clark Howard's. He says, put a credit card in a baggie of water and put it in the freezer. And when you want to buy something, pull it out, wait for the ice to melt, and that reduces the impulse, or it kind of gives you some much needed impulse control. I love Susie Orman. She basically is like, nope, you don't buy it. It's just whatever works for you. Dave Ramsey has a few others. He'll probably yell at you a little bit. And you just have to figure out what works for you. Mine was going back to basics with having cash, and I like the old school, the envelopes. Instead of different bank accounts, you use different envelopes, and you have this much money for groceries, you have this much money for miscellaneous, you have this much for savings. And it doesn't get interest like some people like doing that in different bank accounts, the more tech savvy people. But I like just kind of doing the old fashioned cash method. All right, going back to the envelopes and cash only, that is the best thing that I have done, that I've seen that makes a difference. And a lot of it is breaking bad habits. And whatever that bad habit is, I know I took 12 minutes the other day to tell you how I broke that habit of going to Starbucks every day, because $5 adds up, especially if you compound the interest you would have made if you put it into an investment account over 30 years. So I just challenge you, there's so many different advice columns, everything from Clark Howard, Susie Orman, Dave Ramsey. I think they're all great, but you have to find what works for you, and everyone's situation is different. So my challenges to you is figure out how to break your habits. Mine is to, I haven't cut up the credit cards, but that's because I've been able to put them away with the help of COVID and being on an island and couldn't spend. But I also can put them away, and I will only spend the cash that I have allotted, and it just helps me. And it's what I've noticed. It doesn't prevent emergencies, because they always happen regardless of how much planning we do. The cash stops my impulses and impulsive spending, and it makes me think and be a little bit more intentional. And that's what I challenge you with working on loans. If it's, bad, I call credit card debt bad debt. Student loans aren't that much better. Those are, we'll talk about all different loans and my opinions of those at another date. But whatever your goal is, Dave Ramsey says take the smallest one. And it helps create, a good mindset. I'd say take your lowest one and get it paid off, and then go after the higher interest rates. Or how we recently did it, very briefly, the $118,000 was not in a nice, pretty bucket. It actually happened. I'm very embarrassed at how it got to the point that it got, because I consider myself kind of a knowledgeable person. I wouldn't say always intelligent, because I'm a human and I can be impulsive and emotional and not, robotic, if you will. But we had, debt with Wayfair. We furnished an entire house in the Caribbean with on a Wayfair credit. And even though that was a zero interest bearing, it was still credit, and they were going to tack it on in the end if you missed one of those payments. And so I just don't even like to set myself up for that kind of failure, if you will. So I ended up paying that debt off. We had 2 car notes. One was at 15, one was at, I think, 18,000. Both of those were low interest rates, but we ended up paying those off. And then we had one bad debt that was about $80,000. That was a high debt that was kind of fixing some errors in some investments that we had made in Roatan, Honduras. And I use the term investment loosely. Some could call it a money pit, like a boat. It was not a boat though, but you get the analogy. So I would say, we just tackled it with, we did tackle the small ones first because that was easier, and then we put all of our energy into that last final $80,000 loan, and and that actually did have the highest interest rate, and we tackled that one last, but that was because that added up to all of the other ones, and it was a little slow going at the beginning, especially in, January, February. It was like we're making $300 payments everywhere, and then slowly by like June, we're like, oh, now we're making an $800 payment here. All right, we're rocking. And then September, it's like now it's a $1,500 payment. So it's a little slow, but it does work. And I'd say pick your poison, pick your method on how you want to pay that debt off. It's just the biggest thing is those habits, changing the habits and changing the impulse control. Or that's mine. Yours might be a little bit different, and I know everyone's situation is different. So a one size fits all debt annihilation I don't think is always realistic. So I'm always open. If you have any questions, I can give you my opinions. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just a real estate agent and accredited investor and a human being that has put myself into debt more times than I can count because I don't know. But I do think this last time, I think I figured it out, but let's talk about that in 3 years and see what I've done since then. So thank you guys for tuning in. I'm always available and love to talk finances with you at any and all times. And thank you guys for tuning in and making it to the end. You're amazing. Thanks.